Hope everyone is doing well. Today we're going to be talking about writing an APUSH. Okay, so um, on the AP exam, you will have two long essay questions. One will be a document-based question, which you will be given 7 different documents, written and visual sources, and you'll have to write an essay over it. The other one will give you an opportunity to choose from multiple prompts at which you will just write a long essay. And there is a rubric and a criteria for that we'll be going over later in the year. But for now, what I want to focus on is the thesis statement. So when we talk about writing an APUSH, this first lesson is simply going to be how do we ensure that we have a proper thesis for you to get credit on the AP exam. That will be our focus with this first lesson. I think it's important before we go any further to make sure that we understand there is a difference between the way that you might write an essay in, let's say, an English class and the way you would write an essay in a history course. And you're going to see very quickly that College Board assesses 4 specific types of historical thinking skills. Okay, those are historical argumentation. Can you make an argument using evidence? Can you put evidence together and create an argument? Can you analyze evidence? Meaning, can you look at different sources? Can you gain their relevance? Can you come to conclusions using these sources to make that overarching argument? Next, can you interpret? Can you look at different historians' accounts, put them together, and then come out with an understanding of those events? Because as you've already heard in this course, you have different perspectives, right? You have one side, in the American Revolution, you have the American side explanation of what happened, and you have the British side of what happened. And there's some things they share in common, but then there are some explanations they have that are different. So as historians, and I say myself and you guys, as historians, as people that are studying history, we've got to take a look and try to understand what actually happened, taking in both accounts. And lastly is contextualization. We have to be able to look at events that happened and study them during their time and understand the broader regional, national processes that are going on at that time, right? We can't just study something in a bubble. We have to understand how one event impacted the region around it, the state around it, the country around it, and the world. So we have to understand things in context. So all that being said, when we talk about writing an essay in a history course, we have got to stick to those 4 historical thinking skills. You want to make sure that everything is focused on creating a historical argument. Now, in an English class, you might be looking for things like, a way to catch the reader's attention. You might look for creative transitions and things like that. There's not going to be anything in the grading rubric for anything catching the reader's attention or anything like that. That's just not the way this is functioning, okay? So by the way, it will be graded as a rough draft when you write this essay for College Board. So they understand that they've given you only 55 minutes to write the document-based question and only 35 minutes to write the long essay question. So they understand that this isn't something you got to take home and really study for days or anything like that. So again, it's more important that you focus very much on evidence and making an overall historical argument when you write an essay in AP US history. So let's start with the thesis statement and the formula that I provide on how to teach, how to ensure that you have the points for the thesis statement. So here's how this works. Here's the simple formula. The formula is X, however, A, B, therefore Y. X, however, A, B, therefore Y. The X represents the strongest point against your argument. So let's say I'm going to argue that the American Revolution forever changed the projection of America, okay? I might start by saying, my X statement might say, look, some things remain the same, okay? There was still slavery in America after the American Revolution. There was still a hierarchy. Women were still not involved in the political system. Not everyone had the right to vote. Those things did not change after the American Revolution, right? So there were some examples there of societal aspects of America that did not change after the American Revolution. But I would lead off with one of those statements. Okay, then I would transition A and B would then be my argument for why it did change. Also, so A and B are the 2 points that support your overall argument. And then when we talk about why is simply going to restate the prompt and what our position will be. So let me repeat that again. X is the strongest point against your argument, or if you're going to say that two things are more similar than they are different, you might put the difference first. Okay, so it's whatever your counter argument is or whatever your least significant point is. Okay, if you have two stronger points that you're going to focus on more later in the essay, make those points A and B. Make X be your kind of minimalist point. Okay, and now we have our categories. Okay, X will be a paragraph, A will be a paragraph, and B will be a paragraph. Those will be our body paragraphs, which we're going to do that in another lesson, talking about how to kind of fill out those body paragraphs, but just to kind of give you an overall picture of what the essay will look like. So we're going to try an example here together. So here is a prompt that was actually on the AP exam a few years ago. It said, choose two of the following and analyze their impact on colonial North American development between 1620 and 1776. It's routine that they will give you three to choose from. So they give you Puritanism, the Enlightenment, and the First Great Awakening. Now, the first thing I want to make sure that we point out is whenever you're given a prompt, you need to read the prompt very carefully. You need to make sure that you see exactly what they're asking you. I always give the example that when I first started teaching AP history, I was at a training and they showed an essay, and the prompt was, what was the impact of the bubonic plague in world history? It was something along those lines. And they gave us an essay, and it was a great essay written by a young lady that described the spread of the bubonic plague, what its origin was, what countries it started in, so forth and so on. And again, one of the people giving this presentation said this essay got a 0. And I was very shocked. You know, of course, the young lady had written at a very high level, I felt like. But the presenter made the point of the question was not how it started. It wasn't about its origin. It was about the impact that it had on the world around it. It was about how it affected things in world history, and the author of that essay did not address that. So you got to make sure that you see what they're asking you and before you start your essay. So notice it is the impact of two of those three items on colonial North American development. So we need to focus on what their impact was. We don't need to explain what those things are. We need to explain what their impact was. That's very important. So next, you might want to, if you want to go ahead and try this on your own, if you want to go and try to write the thesis statement, I would go ahead and do that now. Pause the video, go ahead and try it. But I'm going to walk you through an example of how you could address this question using the thesis formula next. Okay, so what I would do is I would first brainstorm very quickly. We're going to talk about how to do a pre-write more as the year goes on, but I just chose the Enlightenment and the First Great Awakening. So underneath the Enlightenment, just brainstorming here really quickly, said, the Enlightenment focused on individual rights, that as an individual person, you have certain basic fundamental rights, came out of the Enlightenment. Also an Enlightenment idea was separation of powers. Charles de Montesquieu talked a lot about that the executive, the person who executes the law, should be different than the person who writes the law. The legislative branch needs to be different than the people who actually interpret it on an individual basis, the judiciary. So that was an idea that came out of that time, that movement. And the limited power given over to government is obviously very important. That comes out of the Enlightenment, that just because you are the leader, just because you are the ruler, that does not mean that you have all authority. That was an Enlightenment idea. Quick brainstorm over the First Great Awakening. They emphasize personal, individual responsibility during the First Great Awakening. This is where you see Christian groups really begin to emphasize that there's not just a called few. That kind of predestination motion is questioned in America, where a lot of preachers like George Whitefield, like Jonathan Edwards, begin to say, listen, if everyone's a sinner, but if you repent and are baptized and follow these steps, you can go to heaven too. And it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're rich. It doesn't matter if you're poor. It doesn't matter who you are. You can go into heaven. So this really began to emphasize that you controlled in a sense. Now, you controlled the future of your soul. So there was a lot of individual responsibility there. They also believed that there should be freedom to express religious beliefs. You would think that religious leaders would have always thought that way, but they didn't. If you remember coming out of Europe, we've had a huge war between Catholics and Protestants. So this new Great Awakening movement understood that if you just focused on your own individual sect of religion and didn't allow for other ones, that could be problematic. And the last is that they believed their religion should be open up to all people. They weren't turning people away from their doors. They weren't practicing what they viewed as kind of an elitist view of religion, which was we want to keep it to this core central group. We believe anyone can be saved, so we want to encourage as many people as we can to go to church. So after brainstorming, I'm going to get to show you here, kind of looking over these. I see that there is something that both have in common. They both had an aspect of individual, well, I need to get better at using that marker. Don't worry, I'll get better over time. But they both had an emphasis on individuals, whether it was individual rights or individual responsibility. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that my first point. I'm going to tie in that they both had a similar view that individuals had certain rights and responsibilities, and that's going to have an impact on later North America. Okay, so I kind of group that together. That'll be my X point. Then I'm just going to look through the others, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick what do I want my A and B points to be that I'm going to argue throughout the essay. Okay, so now looking at this and now putting it all together, I'm going to show you just the thesis statement that I was able to put together. So here you go. So here's my thesis statement. The First Great Awakening and the Enlightenment emphasized the importance of the individual in society. However, the Great Awakening emphasized a very democratic ideal that anyone who followed certain steps could be saved, while the Enlightenment focused on ideas of proper governance by those elected to serve. Therefore, both the Great Awakening and the Enlightenment had a significant impact of the development of the unique North American society. Okay, honestly, just reading that now, it's a little wordy. But notice I didn't get super specific. I didn't explain separation of powers or that there should be limited power on government. I just said proper governance. You don't have to get super specific in your thesis. You're going to get super specific in the body paragraphs. But again, I have allowed the reader here to see very quickly, I'm going to argue for the significant impact of these two movements. And I'm going to show that there was some overlap in that they both emphasize the individual, but then the Enlightenment ideas were more focused on what the government should look like, while the Great Awakening was more focused on morality and that all people should have access to that morality, which of course does play into our democratic view of government that everyone should be involved. So again, that's just the way I put those things together. So you can be too wordy. You don't want to explain too much in your thesis statement, but also you don't want to give too little information, because if you're too vague, if I just said, let's say, First Great Awakening and Enlightenment emphasized individuals, the Great Awakening said people could be saved, and the Enlightenment said things about elected officials. I mean, you've got to give them at least some descriptors there where they can see where the essay is going, where they can see where the essay is set up in your thesis. But you're not writing your whole, you have body paragraphs to explain the evidence and the points later, so it doesn't have to be any more specific than what I just put out right there. So now I'm going to give you a prompt. I'm going to leave it with you and give you the opportunity to answer one for yourself. And again, just try to develop a thesis statement. Use that thesis formula. I have the AP writing packet is included. Look over that. Again, get that formula in your head. This was great practice. Again, after you do this for a while, the thesis statement, it'll come really easy to you. So here is the prompt I'm going to give for you today. Compare the ways in which religion shaped the development of colonial society up to 1740 in two of the following regions: New England, Chesapeake, or the Middle Atlantic. Again, choose two of those regions and develop your own thesis statement. Again, this was a prompt just used a few years ago in the AP exam, so it's a great way to test your readiness for doing that, which of course you still have, this is what we're going to develop on throughout the year. So later on, I'm going to talk to you about how to use evidence, how to set up your body paragraphs, how to make sure you get all the points on the exam. But today, our focus is just going to be the thesis statement.